In the immortal words of DJ Wee, the legend DJ Wee, what is up, bitches? Welcome to Immortal Minds. We have another demo review here for you today, but we're going all the way overseas, across the pond to Europe here for the action. As we've done a lot of North America recently, I'm here with Mike, and we have ourselves a team that people are calling the best team in the world, but I feel like that's not accurate given that you can only really say that they're the best team in Europe, right? I think that's fair. So they'll be playing against Bonk. This was the finals of the level 2 clash and it's split. What is up, Mike?
Doing good. How about yourself?
I'm good as well, man. I'm pretty tired today, but
Same,
I'm
same.
ready. I'm ready for this though. I think there's a lot of this is actually the perfect one, given that we're both kind of tired, because this game I feel like has is quite simple. The attacking side of G2. So I feel like it works. It's not a super convoluted attacking side with loads of adjustments to a default and permutations and adjustments from the defense. It's pretty cut and dry. That was my impression from watching this beforehand. Did you get kind of the same vibe?
Yeah, I think G2 right now, since they have a roster of such skilled people, they don't really have to make adjustments, and they're very much we're gonna keep just trying stuff, and as long as it's working, we're not gonna change it all. And if teams can't adapt to it, then that's their problem. But I think they just play off each other really well, so it definitely helps them with that style that they're running currently.
A quick thought before we go into it, and I totally agree. Um, how many how many VODs have you watched the last couple of days, Mike?
You don't want to know. I woke up at, let's see, I woke up at 9 today, and I watched VODs until noon, and then ate for 30 minutes, and then I watched VODs until 5 p.m. So that was just today.
Nice. What did you eat? How did you feel yourself?
Just leftovers in it, just whatever takes 30
Leftovers.
seconds to fix, yeah.
Fair enough. I won't ask anymore. Okay. So well, we might as well get into the VOD. I actually myself, when I was doing notes for this one, I didn't even do any notes on round one because I felt like it was pretty standard in terms of the setup. It wasn't particularly noteworthy, and it was more about, as you sort of mentioned previously, the opportunities the individuals were able to create. Because we did get an aggression. I think we get an aggression on a main with a Sage slow. That's I think defended by Pit, if I'm not mistaken. Are we going to call him Pyth or Pit? Because I know technically it's supposed to be Pits, but
It's supposed to be Pith. I always saw it as Pith. And Sliggy thought it was
yeah,
Pyth, so we have 3 different camps on what his name's actually supposed to be.
there we go. Well, fuck it. Let's just do whatever we want, I guess.
All right.
It's not a commentary. We have no obligation to be consistent with one another, so
Yeah,
all
so
good.
I thought it was kind of interesting how Bonk, because a lot of teams right now on defending, they kind of try to set traps because attacking teams are generally kind of defaulting on their pistols, but they smoke off sewers and they just go straight in with a paranoia towards the back. But David P drops that slow there so they can trade out to there because it totally screws up the timing on their aggression. And now that they have 2 kills towards A from that aggression, they split through the vents.
Yeah, and you can see that we do actually have a Viper here. This is like a thing that Bonk does. We won't probably talk too much about Viper because unfortunately it doesn't come into play too much on the defense. And obviously we're focused on the attack here. But yeah, you can see the madness sort of devolves into when they're actually able to make their way through ropes. Again, I didn't have too many notes on this, Mike. Did you pick up any sort of minute details that you think are interesting in this pistol after the opening?
I just thought the opening was unique, trying to throw people off guard, especially if they're trying to do an exec, and then G2 made a good read, you get 2 kills, let's just split through vent. I think this part is where they kind of mess up because they give so many, if you look at the mini map right now, I have it enlarged, and they isolate all these different fights. So now Breach on site, Bonk actually can flash through the wall, because now he has these isolated fights, because Mixwell's over towards elbow, and then Patik's on the rafters, and Pith was 1 HP towards spawn, so he can't really help either. So now they're putting themselves in a situation where Bonk actually can get back into this by splitting up these fights.
Well, it's GT though, so it's never that easy. Actually, when I saw Patek, just jumping around there, it kind of reminded me in CS when you can bunny jump backwards. to make yourself really hard to headshot. And I actually looked like
Yeah.
that was working, so I'm gonna have to give that a go. Those sexy maneuvers look to be working there.
Mixwell also makes the frenzy look super sick as well in this clutch that he gets. I think people are gonna start catching on to buying the frenzy and pistol, but it's gonna take some time. Sinatra's the other person that's really been owning it.
Yeah, yeah, I was definitely really curious to see that, given how great his aim is. And I don't know that there's really. I'm trying to think if there's a cost difference for Jet in the pistol between the frenzy and the ghost. I don't know that you get. Do you get anything extra? I mean, it's 400, so you can get the light armor with it, and Jet already has the dash. But I believe that we actually saw. I think there was an. I think we had an updraft. I don't know if we
Yeah,
saw it on the screen, so it's hard to say. But obviously, you do get the option to have the armor. That's like the main difference if you're looking for that light armor. And with
yeah.
all the ghosts out there, it's something that does definitely make sense. And I could see that like the counter would be people buying sheriffs down the line, which is what I tried. That was like the meta I tried to set in the beta. I knew that it was coming. I knew the sheriff meta was coming in the pistol eventually.
It's still on its way here. You were just that far ahead of the curve. I think the frenzy armor reminds me a lot of like the raid boss tech 9 from like 2015, 2016 CS.
Yeah, it definitely feels like, especially on Jet, I like it because again, you're not sacrificing a dash if you are going for the armor. And if you do get in people's faces, you're probably going to kill them first, even if they get a headshot on you, which I think that's kind of Jet's job, is just dealing with that first player. Like getting a kill immediately does so much for to create space for your teammates. Right. So anti-eco time
Yeah, so
and
oh, go
aggression
ahead.
from Bonk. Now you go ahead.
So they were just trying to do like a heavy mid control here, and the one thing I thought was questionable was Sife's walls on this map, especially on the defending side. I thought some of them weren't like the best place and they could get more value out of them. So he's going to wall when I play it forward. He's going to wall down this entire right side, except I don't think that's super valuable because the people coming out of sewers, they can just like swing out behind the boxes and have some cover, whereas the market guy isn't really contested. So they slow bottom mid here. David P will slow this to counter them pushing once they nade in the sewers. But the thing is, like, market's not contested very much, so artists can actually fight this, and then they can just walk through that wall. So I think if they would have reversed the side the wall was on, they might have seen better results.
Well, so the one thing about the wall though is that it does decay, and the decay lasts for quite a while when you pass through it. So I don't know what the damage difference is going to be like with the pistols. Um, but I can imagine that it helps.
Yeah, I just don't know if it's like, because you're weighing up the damage versus like, can we funnel some people out here and get an advantage on those fights because we're taking a 4 on however many come out of sewers at that point, but you're nading into sewers, so you're also doing damage with that. So I guess it's just like a question of which side do we think they're gonna come through, like more of them are gonna walk through if anyone's here. And then we can kind of just skip this because it's just a guy saving a shorty on A, trying to get a kill, so we'll skip all that nonsense.
Yeah. So for those of you, I guess not me and Mike, for those of you guys who are watching this, there are a lot. This game has a lot of contacts, like explosive plays from G2, that I think is kind of interesting to take note of because one of the discussion points I think that we may get into is the differences between this kind of a play style to split and then what we're used to from teams like Envy and Sentinels, which is much more default heavy, especially if you're Envy. So this is round 3. So this is going to be the first buy round. And yes, I like this a lot. This is that classic situation where you have those leftover SMGs. You know you're going to be likely up against an operator. Obviously, they can see the money, so they know if they know Bonk very well, they can probably assume that there's going to be the operator in play, and they know that everyone else is going to have full rifles, and you're still again stuck on some SMGs. So typically in this situation, you don't want to play into the hands of the strengths of your opponents. So you don't want to just be taking normal battles and like defaulting normally. if you can find a way to gain ground quickly where the SMGs can play close to medium ranges, that's usually it's just an effective way to mitigate the fact that you have that weapon disadvantage and keep your weapons where they're strong. And we're going to see, I think, probably the best look for this and I was thinking about this, Mike. You can tell me if you agree or not. I feel like what they do, which is going to be a B main explosion with Pith lurking on the or Pith lurking on the cipher. I feel like going B heaven is basically going to be the best bet at denying the operator multiple kills. It's kind of that's kind of how I felt about this, which is why I liked it.
Yeah, because like when you push them off that first angle, if they're posted off in male, like the rest of the fights in B heaven are really awkward to hold with an op, especially if you're back towards like that spawn stairs towards B heaven. So I think if you can push them off that first angle and then you just drop into hell onto B site, those fights really favor you a lot compared to A. I think Bonk also with the setup they're running here, because they're obviously going for like a very strong A hold because they have the trips in male and the trips in vent, so they're obviously trying to give up mid and just play 3 heavy towards A, and they're going to leave Scythe posted up on B main here with the off when we play it forward. I think it would have been better if you're going to play heavy A though to reverse who you have playing and instead maybe have their Cypher over towards B, because it kind of creates an awkward round here when this comes into play, this B heaven split, because now he's totally isolated into B main, because obviously they can't hold B heaven with just the raise there.
One thing I'm curious to look at too is the pathing on entry from the players here on G2, and this is a lineup from Yasin with the raise, the paint bombs. It's pretty easy one to take note of. This is something that I immediately was like, if I play raise now, because I haven't worked that lineup out, goes a bit too deep, but wall goes up and they're in. One thing to note too is that we're going to see Patateg will be the omen on the spike plant, and one of the reasons for that is that it allows him to reinforce extremely quickly towards the rafters or heaven position. And so if anybody else had the spike, they would be committed down on the site. But you can see here he's able to support and trade for David P, which is that's a really I felt like that was a huge detail.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well, because like you said, if you're anyone else playing that, you just have to play like backside or something, but he can immediately assist them in heaven. And when we were talking about their pathing and their spacing out heaven, Mixwell does a really good job of this, of like jet dashing out anywhere. So he immediately jet dashed out of heaven. So then anyone playing like hell or on rafters is looking at him, and that buys everyone else coming out of heaven a lot of space when they're dropping down into the site.
And there's also the that lurk from Pit, which dealt with how Safe played it with the Viper, which was actually a pretty smart way to deal with the situation, is just giving up the B site and then trying to take B main control. And again, we'll consistently see that Pith. I'm already saying his name multiple ways. I can't even commit to how to say his name. We'll see in many of these rounds the way that he lurks and is able to just really add insult to injury. But speaking of Pitts, he's got the cam up here. Now I actually really was curious as to your take on this, Mike. So they are in an anti-eco situation, if I'm not mistaken. By the way, is my mic fuzzy? Is it weird?
Doesn't sound like it to me, but
okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, I want to hear your take on this, because when I saw, because this is not a cam, I'm not sure if he throws this cam up, how many times he throws this cam up, whether it's super standard, but this is going to be one of those many contact plays, and the cam does spot somebody. I think it spots the breach on site, and then I think that's all the info it gets, and then they just walk in. So what do you think about this? Like this little setup?
I like the cam to spot. It's like a pretty common one that we've seen. We're starting to see more teams just stand by the wall at the start and break it. But I think the way they approach taking A here, so they're not throwing much utility really. They're not giving them any smokes to hide in. And if you look at, I'll enlarge the mini map quick. If you look at where they're positioned, they're not going directly into sight. They're taking the longest range duel against anyone on site that might be with like a shotgun or a pistol, and they're just hugging this bottom heaven wall. And that also denies anyone that's like looking out from heaven from shooting them in the side here, or walking through a heaven smoke, so now they don't have to really worry about having a heaven smoke. Because when we play it forward here, Mixwell is going to jet dash again, buys them a lot of space, kills the guy back sight, and then everyone has like all these really long range fights if anyone else will open on site as well. I think that's like the main difference between, like, a lot of teams don't really think about like, okay, what's the longest range angle we should be taking on some of these fights, because I still see a lot of teams on anti-ecos, especially on like Haven, take really suboptimal fights and like garage or towards B, and you just want to be taking whatever longest range fight you can, because we're seeing a lot of anti-ecos right now where teams are only carrying 2 or 3 guns into the next round, and then your opponents are actually getting a way better value buy than you.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a lots of interesting, I think, meta shifts that might come from that kind of dynamic backwards and forwards. So it does feel exploitable, like you're kind of mentioning. Um, but into this next round, so buy round, this is a really weird one. When I saw this, I was just like, I was a little bit disappointed in G2. It kind of felt like it reminded me of a matchmaking situation where like a Viper drops an ult and everyone's like, oh shit. And no one really had a plan or really understood how to
Yeah.
react to it. So we're going to see Safe drop his Viper ult in mid. We have a boom bot which kind of protects it as it starts initially. And so no one can really rush into the male position to really create any punishes. And G2, again, it really doesn't feel like they know how to react to this, but they felt like they had to do something because obviously on split, having mid control, you can't just allow the defenders to have it for free. You have to try to have some presence. And this is, yeah, I don't know what's happening here, Mike.
I
Please
think
explain.
I think they're just trying to isolate the Viper, because they're like, okay, he ulted mid, so he's definitely going to just be trying to get picks here and then falling off on these angles. But it wasn't coordinated enough, because one of the massive things besides the decay is the Viper's vision inside the smoke. So if you get info of like, if you like minimize the areas the Viper can actually be in, right? So you use Artis's nade and his boombot to make sure they're not just sitting in the middle of mid. And then you're like, okay, it probably ulted from male. So now we can try to walk up, but Patek could flash us in as well. Because you just want to deny as much that vision as possible and try to limit where the Viper's at, so you're not just walking through their smoke, which is exactly what they want you to do. And you're trying to just be like, okay, they could be here, they could be here, and we're just like totally guessing this entire time.
And I feel like there's a mind game that exists now as well because of that change where your teammates can just be in the Viper role and there's no repercussions. They don't have any health damage. So it's at this point you're thinking like, if in that Viper role, is there anybody except Viper? Because even Viper can now be outside of the ult for a very long time. So
Yeah.
let's say like in theory, Viper could actually leave the ult and just stand on B heaven and completely give up mid, or there could be 3 guys standing in the ult. You just don't know at this point. It's because either thing can be the case. So I actually find that to be an interesting dynamic because it is a change which is very new. So I do wonder how we're going to see that maybe play to people's advantages or not. Given how low the pick rate is for Viper, I guess we won't really have a sample size anytime soon that's going to let us know the answer to that. But still, it's an interesting one to think about.
Yeah, I think especially because like if you're on a map like Split and they just ult mid, it's a really interesting question on whether or not you're just going to instantly respect that map control like you said, or are you going to try to narrow down where they can be at or like investigate. I think that's the one thing that makes Viper really good on this map, is because I think Sova's like such a hard counter to her,
Yes.
and you just can't, like, Sova's like all right on this map honestly, but there's just better agents to pick over him, I think.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I was going to mention that this is like that one map you don't have to worry about a Sova, which is, as you say, like the natural counter to the Viper. Um, right. Which round is this? Round 6?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Oh, this is an interesting one. This is one of those rounds where Mixwell kind of just well, in theory, the opening here is really good from Mixwell. I guess anyone who plays Jet, you can kind of learn from this. Mixwell basically just is able to. I mean, they get a little bit lucky. because the A defense, as you can see there, as Mike enlarged the mini map, the A defense is very reliant on Cypher. Cypher's the only person there. There's a couple trips and a cam, and we're going to see Mixwell just dash through the lower trip and just updraft onto the rafters, and then basically deny vision with the cloud bursts, and his entire team will get onto the site. It doesn't go quite as straightforward afterwards as you would think, but I guess we can get into that.
Yeah, so like the Bonker is playing kind of like a heavy min B setup. They're expecting a B again. Just playing retake towards A, maybe get a kill Cypher can. But Mixwell is just so good at buying all of the space here. And then they know they don't have like any heaven ramp and they don't have anyone back towards spawn. But they also know, this is another interesting thing, is like a lot of pro teams are giving up vents on these rounds, or just in general, they're giving up vent control. So Artist comes through a really late lurk towards mid through vents and then gets that kill heaven. So now you're in like a really decent spot positionally here, because you realize, okay, we don't have any heaven ramp control or A main control, and we just had a guy flank through heaven, so they're going to be focused on him in vents as well if anyone else is in heaven. So now we can try to push through screens and try to collapse and control heaven with him, and that's why they planned for heaven as well. I just think they kind of messed up their collapse on the heaven here, with David just peeking and trying to collapse by himself. Otherwise, it could have been like a really good post plant for them, but Artist
Yeah.
bails them out.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So yeah, this is pretty mad because here's the pinging through the dark cover as well, which gives artists an almost immediate kill. Is pinging is pinging through stuff like that? Should that be cool, Riot? I'm not sure what the answer is. I
Nope.
feel like it's pretty mental that that's the thing, but it's one of the things that actually wins artists around because he's able to refresh his paint bombs afterwards, which basically allow him to win. But I think if we ignore the artist clutch there, I think as Mike was saying, I think we need to think about the post plant. Actually, could we go back, Mike, to
Yeah.
maybe like a 5 seconds after Mixwell's like double cloud bursted and his team's in the site? Because one of the things here, there's a couple things to talk about. One, the fact that one thing I really like about this is that Mixwell uses the cloud bursts. Because in terms of a smoke, there's the cloud bursts are really good for the one ways, the gimmicky one ways. But in post plants, that's not as important because they're so slow and you can kind of wait them out, especially in retake situations like this. And they're really good at just denying vision like instantly. And the only time, what I really like about the cloudburst here is that Mixwell's the first in, he dashes in. There is no warning of this push until Mixwell's in rafters, and that happens so quickly. And then he doubles smokes basically, which allows Padatek to keep his dark covers, which have more value in a post plant scenario. A lot of the time, like especially if you've only got one smoker, you only want like you're gonna throw the dark covers out pretty much straight away, which will help you get the site. And you don't know what you're going up against on the site yet. So that may feel like a good safe option. So I love that the cloud bursts are used early like this as opposed to the dark cover. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. I think that's a really cool touch by G2 because it gives them the ability to make this push a lot more, it's a lot faster acting without warning. And then secondly, I wanted to ask you, Mike, and sort of draw focus here. The A ramp control is really one of the places where the control is lost. And A ramp control is a pretty big deal, I would say, because on the post plant, having A ramp control gives you the ability, even if the retakers are able to get a heaven, you can backstab them or at least threaten that and have that high ground. And you can give up the space on the site and not really have too many problems, especially if you have a player on the site. But I was curious here why G2 put nobody towards the A ramp. Did you have any thoughts about this?
I think they're just so occupied since like Artist was lurking through mid, they wanted to make sure everyone else was on site to set up. And then I still think they made like a decent adjustment here to take screens rather than just staying on the site control. Because afterwards David P even like walls off towards ARAM to delay anyone. But I do think like all the angles you have to go through from screens to heaven and just run in or like risk running into 2 or 3 people retaking from spawn is almost like too much. I think it's really good that Bonk tried to retake from a ramp here. They just got unlucky with that ping through the smoke in heaven. Otherwise, they did a really good job at like identifying what area to contest to retake.
The other thing too here is I wonder how fragile does this also feel for you, Mike? Because the way that the plant works as well is that it's only really planted for artists. If there is a world that artist does like mistimes his lurk, or maybe there's a different rotation and somebody kind of just gets a 1v1 with him before he even gets on his lurk, there, that plant is kind of a little bit wasted. We see this in CS all the time where the whole team will, I think Mirage on the A side, that's the most common example in CS, where there'll be a plant to catwalk. And the whole point is that you want to try to get a player onto catwalk. And so there is inherent danger because the CTs, the meta will exist, that the expectation of a mid lurk exists. So CTs will often lurk there themselves to make sure that that's not a problem. So it felt a little bit fragile to me. No A ramp control, and everything rests on artists. So he did have his ults, so maybe that's part of the reason that they decided to do it like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it might have just been the case as well, where it's like, oh, we got out into site, but we didn't leave anyone A ramp, so now we need to adjust to that after we planted. Did you kind of see that a lot as well? Sometimes where pros plant for one thing, but they don't really account for, like, okay, this happened instead, so now we need to adjust everything to compensate for that. Because that plant's like all right if you're ramp right, because you can just walk out, swing wide, and then it's pretty in the open as well. Or if you have some sort of like nade or molly lineup, it's pretty easy to hit. But I think they definitely were just like, okay, we kind of messed up here with the plant, but now we can just adjust towards heaven.
I actually have one more point to add. One last point about that round.
Go on.
So Mixwell stayed on the frenzy, but he didn't buy a gun. He actually stayed on. He actually popped the ultimate, I believe. So I felt like that was an interesting detail because even if he doesn't pop the ult, there is a huge amount of utility from Jet, just in how much space he cleared, how quickly, with how little notice there was for the defenders. So even without the ult, that play from Jet's really strong, and I could see that could be really cool in a eco round actually. But yeah, anyway, on to the next one, round 7, I believe.
Yeah, so this was their B contact, and then Pith was just defaulting out A to show pressure again with his cam, has all the usual stuff set up. This is what I was talking about with the walls as well. I just feel like these walls are kind of weird because you're blocking off mid, but you're not exactly isolating any angle for yourself. Like, people can still walk out, get in that close left corner. People can peek you through the bottom. I guess that's what he's kind of holding for. I feel like they kind of picked Viper because I know Bonk have ran Viper a lot, especially on this map, and they're pretty good at split. I just thought some of the walls were kind of questionable, but
Didn't
then
we have? Sorry to interrupt. Didn't we have? Didn't the Liquid guys, Eccles and shit? Who else did we have
Eccles
on? I'm
and
blanking.
shit, who we had on the show,
Yeah, I'm blanking for some reason.
Adam
Why am
and
I drawing?
Dom,
Thank you.
Soulcast,
All
yeah.
right. Oh my god, I'm
Jesus,
so
man.
sorry. Please forgive me. But one thing you're talking about Bonk's Viper Walls, um, and how like it kind of forces you to basically, like, if you want to fight it, you do have to stand in one spot and it's kind of awkward. I remember that they mentioned, I think, that mid wall in particular. I don't think that they said it was good or bad, just that it was something that you just have to deal with, or is awkward to deal with.
Yeah, I just think there's like better ways. Like, I think Viper, if people use her right, they're gonna be super good at securing openings with her, especially if like you use the wall to block off all these angles except one, and you're only focused on that angle, and you have like your opper come through or something like that. But relying on people to like walk through your wall to take a really weird angle to clear you, I just don't see that happening as much, but maybe it works sometimes.
One, I gotta say, like, one thing about this Bonk team that I noticed in this game, which I think made G2's style work even better, is how much they wanted to go for those early round aggressions. Because it was the case that G2 never had to worry about an opening coming to them or an opportunity coming to them. Um, and so I do wonder if Bonk were a different team, if G2's game plan looks quite different. If they were playing a more defensive team, or let's say they were playing against a team that's more of a North American style of split, which is more defensive, more passive.
Yeah, I think Bonk, like the way they play on a decent amount of maps, they play better against teams that like default or just trying to like get map control and stuff like that. I don't think G2 style of like, oh, we're on this next gun round, we're just gonna 4-man contact into B main and have our Cypher lurking over towards A, and then we're just gonna walk out B and see what happens. And I feel like that opening we saw in the pistol, more of that would have been good to try to disrupt the like pace of G2 and try to make them conform to your pace as well. But when you're trying to just like walk contact against them, they're just gonna be like in this case, like 4 people there ready to shoot you.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially because if you look at Counter Strike as well, there's like a very proven way to deal with defaulting teams is attacking the extremities. And as you say, contact based teams, it's just like it's just not going to work out for you because you're basically gambling on a whole round sometimes if you do that. But I do think that for them, if they were to make an adjustment, I think as you mentioned, would have been cooler to see more A pressures, just because you're not as committed. I feel like, or there's easier ways to get out, and it's generally from what I've seen from G2, you know, fuck, Pit is going to be like there more of the time. That's where the cipher is going to be. So yeah, so they
Yeah,
kind of get in for free.
yeah, I think as well, like, those aggressions towards A, Bunk's setup, like, their comp here is really good for that because they have Raze's utility to take A main, they have Breach, which we covered in, like, little theory craft thing where we showed, like, a bunch of cool, like, flashes and stuff that just blind everyone A main. You have Omen,
Yeah.
he can smoke deep, Vipers, Mollies, like, you just have so much util to actually try to contest that area, so feel like that would definitely be something to try out in the future.
I'm pretty sure with Viper as well, there's some really there's like so many lineups because the Viper Snakebite it has such an easy trajectory to work with. I would say I haven't like messed too much with it, but when I have, I was always quite impressed with the fact that it didn't feel particularly awkward. Like for example, Brimstone's Molly always felt to me to be kind of a pain to get perfect.
Yeah. I think like Vipers, like it's really weird the trajectory on her mollies, but they do feel like a lot more um
Consistent.
yeah, consistent or stable with them to try to do lineups like that. And they go pretty far, so
I bet
but
there's some good ones from like the A heaven position or top of A ramp. There's got to be some sick ones.
yeah, for sure. I back into the round as well. I thought that like G2 kind of does this a lot where they like isolate themselves on these pushes to get like control or info. And even though they're up in a 5v4 here, they kind of put themselves in a bad spot because Patatek just walks through his own spawn smoke to try to get a little bit of space here. And you already have B main control, Mixwell's playing hell. So you have so much control already, and Pith is going to be on this flank from A. So I kind of wish they would have just waited for his like control coming back and then save Patatek smokes to just to delay them even more.
Yeah, this game felt like the easiest game ever for Perth Pits. But this is not going to work for me.
Just
I need to learn
you
his
gotta
first
pick
name.
one. You gotta pick one.
The worst thing is that I've been casting him since like the very beginning of CS:GO as well. It's even worse.
No one ever
It's like
decided.
simpler times. But yeah, this is like the easiest game for him in terms of the lurking. Like whenever he lurks, he has so much space and just perfect timing. And it's usually also because G2's pushes are so successful. Their initial site takes are so dominant that there's a huge sense of urgency for basically all hands to go onto the retake, and you can't even consider a lurk because there's just so much work ahead of you already. And then we move into an anti-eco again here, which I believe is going to be just a contact again. Open up the note. I mean,
Yeah, it's an A
it's
contact.
usually a good bet with this game.
Yep. I think like contacts are the way to go though against these anti-ecos because I know in NA there's a decent amount of teams that are still using like smokes and stuff when they're going against an eco, and that's like one of the number one rules that we kind of talk about in Counter-Strike, right? Like you want to try to make sure that the pistols have no way to gain an advantage in the round. And when you do stuff like even this cage right here, like you're buying space. to try to get towards heaven, but Mixwell walks through it, and then there's someone playing within it, even though like he was standing in it, so they didn't hear the sound cue. But that's kind of the risk you take when you're using a bunch of util against like these half buys.
Yeah, I feel like for sure I agree that in NA there feels like there's too much respect in these rounds. Generally speaking.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's pretty straightforward here.
I think G2 is like, I know they contact like a lot, like we saw in the last round, they were just contacting B main as well, but I think it's definitely something that teams over here will adapt to over time, just because it's like such a fundamental thing in CS.
It is interesting too as well because the contacting and taking sites does rely a lot on good team play, good mechanics, but also rehearsed pathing, and that's something to really think about too when you watch G2. If you were to study G2, you should really think about how they do the pathing and the timings and spacing when they're doing these pushes. As part, that's like a big. Those are some of the biggest components as to what actually constitutes a push. So make sure to like check that out if you're trying to replicate what they're doing.
Yeah, I think as well, like, because we do acknowledge the fact that G2 may not have like the best strats or like the most elaborate executes or defaults, but at the same time, I think like the way they set up their spacing and their pathing, especially with like how much space Mixwell buys them, it's kind of like, I don't know if there's many teams that are really close to them in that regard, because it feels like everyone is just like on the same page. And even when they get in like poor situations, they do seem to recover pretty well based off of that, because they just have their plan, and even though it's like kind of simple, they just stick with it as well.
Yeah, and speaking of which, this round is again is an interesting one because we don't, I feel like, get to see what the mid round would develop into with regards to like if you see where all the players are on the mini map. Like we have David P on the spike towards B main at the beginning of the round. Artist is with him, and then Patacek is there in sewers, and you've got Pitts and Mixwell towards A ramp. So they're pretty spread out. And usually the spike, especially, is obviously going to be somewhat of a tell as to the intentions of a team. And so I'm not sure what the overall intentions were here, but Mixwell ends up doing a similar movement, with his ultimate with the Blaze Storm, and gets a couple right click kills, I believe, into the A site. So that's just too strong not to like go off of that. And we end up seeing a split through ropes with the bomb as well.
Yeah, I think their original play here, because they have Pattek setting up a flash towards heaven, so they're just waiting to, like, he's going to dash in with his ult, and if anyone's up on heaven, he can kill them if they're peeking with, like, an op or whatever. And I think it's just another one of those, like, we don't really respect these guys. We don't respect, like, what they're doing in this match or what setup they're trying to run against us, so we'll just run this really quick, like, little mini play up towards heaven and try to catch someone off guard.
Yeah, it actually reminds me. I completely forgot about this, but I'm sure most of you guys probably saw the pre-match interview with, I think it was Ardis, wasn't it, right? Where he basically just says that they're gonna fucking
Oh
absolutely
yeah, I think this
maul
was before
Bonk and that
this.
they're nothing and all this kind of stuff. And it kind of they kind of make it look like that in the way that they win these attacking rounds. Because again, the rounds don't even have to devolve into a mid-round scenario. I think that was the thing when I watched this demo, Mike, is that if we look at like a lot of the like some of the most exciting games that we've had in Valorant, and especially in some of the North American matches that we have a lot of really good matchups and these teams that default, there's going to be these spots where there's a back and forth. There's an early round where one team gets an advantage and then tries to play off of that advantage, but it's not super. It's not a super overwhelming advantage. And then maybe there's a small clutch in the mid round from the other team, and it kind of evens it out, and you get this cool little storyline. And then there's a post plant situation, and you get this like late round spot. There's like all these spots for like setups and counter plays and clutches and moments. But in this game, we had the very straightforward G2 basically either get a pickup very early on, or they guess right with their contact, or their contact just is executed really well, and then the round's over. So it didn't really feel like Bonk were in any of these rounds.
Yeah, and I think like I was watching this on Sliggy's stream as well with the scent map that was in this series as well, and it's kind of like a similar story. And just in terms of like EU versus NA, because people in NA don't think G2 would like play very well against these teams that are like top 5 NA. The issue is, I feel like a lot of people in NA, they kind of conform to a similar style right now in terms of like really heavy defaulting on the attacking side and reading out what the opponents are doing. I can't think of any team that really plays like G2 does. Can you?
Not really. I mean, sometimes I feel like Sentinels do play very contacty. Like they'll like have a really big switch in their attacking side, and they'll just start like contacting and kind of alternating bomb sites. But it's not in the same way. It doesn't feel the same. It still feels like a little bit different. So, but and generally they do go to the defaults to start off their attacking halves. So yeah, I don't really feel like it is the case. And what's interesting about the way that G2 are playing things is that it is actually a very punishing way to play against a team that is just playing very standard and passive. Because if you don't have the info, I think we talked about this in the previous game. We covered this principle of timing. And on the defense, the most important thing is to have information so that you can know where the push is coming and know it in advance enough of the push that you can rotate your teammates over, which does take time. So if there is no time and no warning for a push to happen, the attackers will very likely overwhelm the bomb site and take the bomb site and plant the bomb and get post-plant positioning all before you're ready to challenge anything. And all of these steps increases their likelihood to win the round. So that's one of the strengths of contact plays. So I guess the next discussion point in that sense, Mike, is what is the best way to play against a team that's very heavy on the contacts, like we're seeing with G2 here.
I think you just have to have like really well planned out openings for aggression, especially on the defensive side. Because even though like split, like it's kind of an awkward map to get aggressive, right? All these like towards B main and A main both, it's like super awkward to fight through those narrow entry points. And mid is also, you have to invest a lot of utility if you're going to try to fight mid. And it's also very easy for attackers just to retake that bottom mid area. But I think if you, like, even if you don't get a kill, and let's say they did what we were talking about more like on the pistol, right? And they were just trying to get aggressive against Pith at A main. Well, even if you don't kill him, but like you destroy his Cypher trip there at minimum, if you gain that amount of like space and you're destroying his utility, that makes him not as effective on those flanks, right? Because now his trip's destroyed, his camera's probably destroyed, so now he has to really respect you at A, because at any time you could re-aggress towards A main, get info, rotate off. So now he's kind of stuck there, and even though he doesn't die, he's just like stuck there and has to respect that control that you took and that aggression you took early in the rounds, rather than just like, okay, my trip's here, they're not doing anything at A again, I'm gonna go flank B heaven because my teammates are on B.
Do you think that a meta shift involving Sova picks would also be strong? Because one of the things that the drone is really good at is you can throw a drone out there, and if a team is playing a contact style and you don't see anything in the early round, that's a pretty awesome a chunk of info. You're playing against a really slow team that's a bit more defaulty. That the early drone is not as valuable.
I think like just on this map in general though, it's just really hard. Like I do think So is a really good counter to a team like G2, and we see it in some of their other matches as well. It's just on split. I was talking with someone about this the other day. It's like the way Sova's like drone works, it's so awkward on this map because let's say you're to drone through A, right? If you drone all the way through heaven, it's gonna die fairly quickly before you can clear out multiple angles, like in that A lobby towards sewers area. And if you drone through like close to the A ramp, like from A site, you're also kind of in a bad position if they contact or they rush you there as well. And it's kind of a similar thing. You can't clear out as much space with it. B, you can do more with it. Um, but it's just very easy to hide from his drone is like the main point of it. And I think with his ult as well, it's really good. Like if you, especially on a Sen, if you can recon or drone through B main, get that info, maybe pop your ult early. Elevation just really kills his ult because it's so hard to like think about all the different layers on this map and then trying to aim it perfectly and hit people while they're moving like up and down more than just like side to side as well. But I think
Hmm.
we might see Sova at some point because it's just really hard to get info on this map just with Cypher.
Yeah, and I feel like as well this map, it can be quite difficult to deny a team a split if they execute things well. But retaking is really critical. So I do wonder as well if we'll see compositions just geared more towards retakes, because I do feel like that's actually something Sova's amazing at as well, because you get free info with it. Like let's say you are retaking and they do have players on A ramp, and you can get that drone to like push forward towards A ramp, and someone can walk behind it and it's going to spot someone or take some bullets, and that's actually huge in those retake scenarios. And the arrows as well, the shock darts, the recon is all extremely good. Sova's util is amazing on retakes, and can really make or break. So I do wonder if that if it becomes more of a contact based play, it's gonna be hard to honestly consistently deny take site takes. But what you can do is have consistent responses on the retakes. So yeah, I feel like Sova is a good and a possible meta shift that may occur in the future, along with the sheriff on pistols.
I think Killjoy like as well is super underrated for retakes, but we might be a little bit off on that as well. One thing, this is just a little tangent. I've been super annoyed when I watch like ciphers and they're playing retake on B site, and they'll have their cam, but they're in the cam their entire time. Like they'll be looking, it's like, oh, I'm just looking to see if they come out B main. It's like, well, you don't really need to know that at any point. Like you can just hold an off angle because you want them to come out B main because you're playing retake there if they don't walk into your stack wherever else you're set up. But it's like the worst thing that can happen is if they destroy your cam when you're retaking, right? Because that's like the perfect time to be like, okay, he's here, he's here, he's here. Oh, they're about to destroy my cam. Whoop, I just marked one and I know where all of the other positions are and I marked them on the map. That's like the main thing from his cam, but that's been annoying me a lot. So that's off my chest now.
Nice. Well, we can field some questions from the chat if you guys want to ask us anything. As we're pretty quick on this one. I feel like we were pretty efficient, but it was also a more simple demo. We kind of opened up by describing it as such. I would say I think we led the expectations fairly accurately. But yeah, if you guys have any questions for us, we'll be happy to answer some of those before we close the show down today.
I think it's
Oh
hard
yeah.
as well because like we're normally talking about like NA defaults and like, oh, this team's taking this really cool control here. This is what they're doing to counter them as well. But when it's just like contacting, there's only so much you can talk about at a time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like stats. Hmm.
Probably not.
I don't have anything for that really. I don't have any witty. You know what? We opened the show by saying we're both tired, and I also opened the show by saying what is up, bitches. I'm not. I don't have much material right now. I'm just gonna
Ryan Dry.
gonna throw that out there, and I have to try to like do some preparation too for. I'm gonna try to play a dual cup this weekend, but I'm very underprepared because I still don't know the maps very well. So I'm gonna do some of that after this stream.
Thoughts
Just
on
a little bit.
Yassine from Bonk?
Oh, I don't feel like I've watched him enough to really draw an opinion that would be in any way insightful. How about you, Mike?
I think he's a really good aimer, but his crosshair is rubbish, especially every time I see it on my screen. But yeah, I think especially on Rays, he's like a super good Rays and really impactful on both sides. But I've yet to see like a whole lot from him just because they're not they don't have an org or anything, so they're not getting invited to like the blast event this weekend. I think their Viper actually just Scythe just left the team as well, so they're
Oh,
down to 4.
interesting. That's kind of a seems like a pretty characteristic thing for the team as well. So that's going to really mix things up for them. Um, all right, got some other questions. Thoughts on sleeping? Well, sleeping is very important, and in terms of getting better at video games, there's been a bunch of rat-based studies So I don't know, like, there's been human studies on this as well, but studies were basically they were able to show that with the brain activity of rats running through a maze and like learning various patterns through mazes, that same brain activity is going on in the brain when they're sleeping, but at like 20, 30, 40 times speed. So what they seem to draw from that study is the fact that when we're sleeping, we're rehearsing all of our technique work at like massive, increases in speed. So like lots of rehearsal is going on in sleep. So you want to have the best quality sleep if that study is anything to go by. And that's actually also, I don't know if you've experienced this, Mike. I definitely have. Where like you'll be practicing and doing technique stuff, and and you won't notice any changes day by day, and then there'll be a day when you're just like, oh, I'm sick now. Have you ever
Yeah,
had that feeling?
yeah, definitely. And then the next day you're not, so you change your sense and your crosshair and like every setting imaginable to get back to that point. But we had a good question from Thestral. Do you think G2 will suffer the same issues as TSM/Sentinels with heavy counter strats and prep to take them down?
The thing is that like, so I think in this game in general, I think anti-stratting is definitely a lot more obvious, and if you get hit by it, it's harder to evade a loss in the immediacy of like one series against a team, and that's just simply because there's less overall rounds you're playing on any given map, which means you have less time to adjust. So that is something that increases the variance, and that's just a part of the way Valorant is. But what I will say is that if you look at the people on the team, you have a lot of extremely experienced CS players who know how to do everything and have an enormous amount of experience. So I have no doubt that if G2 needed to switch up and adapt their style, then mix in more things, more defaulting and other things such as that they would be able to do that very quickly and very comfortably. I think that right now what we're seeing is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They have incredibly good players. They've got a style that just seems to be working very consistently. You would not want to change anything until it's actually necessary. I don't know if you're on the same page with that. Like,
I think it's kind of easy to like anti-strat what they're doing in a setup depending on what map they're playing. Like I think there's some stuff they do on bind that's kind of readable, but it's just kind of like, okay, so if you're gonna try to counter someone that does like this contact setup, like we're just gonna keep doing it until it breaks. Are you going to invest utility to take aggression against them to get info early on in the round? Because at that point, it's like if they aren't there, then you invested that utility and you have that info, but they're on the other side of the map doing the opposite of what you're trying to counter. So you're kind of playing that 50-50 game sometimes of like, okay, are we going to catch them this time or do we have like a read? Like, are they doing something in the early round? Like, are they throwing utility somewhere that means they're stacked 4 on this side and Pith is lurking over here? Or are we going to try to isolate someone because we know they're always by themselves? I feel like there's a lot less you can do against a team that does like contact stuff versus if you're defaulting, because defaulting's like, okay, we know you do like this is what all of your people are doing in this round, so we're going to isolate him, and by isolating him, this is going to disrupt your mid round. So I think it's just a lot harder to execute like that.
yeah, that's a very fair point. Um, we have another good one actually. I want to see if I make sure I didn't miss anyone. Kelvin asked thoughts on the Odin. I want to return to that because I want to go to his other question. No, the breach question. So, are we going to see more triple duelist compositions with the breach update? So, there's like three good questions there. That question is really interesting, I think, because I feel like you could do some really stupid stuff with the third flash. I feel like having three flashes is a bit crazy because in theory you could just contact super hard and fast into sites, and it's kind of difficult, like very difficult to deal with, especially because you just won't be able to pick off players, or it'll be very hard to pick off players early on. In theory, I haven't thought too much about this, but I feel like I want to see some people abusing the fact that I think it's actually you, Mike, that and one of the really early Immortal Minds shows, you brought up the idea that there could be these triple duelist compositions where, because you have this was back in the Sage meta too, when Sage was, well, I guess there's always been a Sage meta until very recently. It was back when Sage was extremely good. And it was the idea that what if you have three agents who have the movement capability, so Raze, Jet, and Omen possibly, to get over the wall and over the ice, and then you got three agents in the site. So if a team's over relying on Sage on their on and delay, then they're going to get three duelists in their face. But I wonder if you add breach into that mix, that you just can't deny an extremely quick presence onto sites. Have you had any thoughts around this, Mike, given the breach update?
I think it's definitely viable. It's just a matter of like, are you going to be up against a comp that is doing, like, they pick a comp that's just to slow everything down at the start of the round? Because if you, like, a comp like that, you definitely need to be dictating that pace, right? You need to be doing like fast bursts and stuff like that. And if you can't achieve that, you're really going to struggle like mid to late round. So, and someone else, Thestral, brought up a really good point. Like, you're also going to be able to get on site a lot, but are you going to have like enough util or like good enough util against like a retake? Because obviously, if you have three duelists in breach, I guess you kind of lack out on info as well, because you would probably want Omen for smoke so the duelist can have a lot of space. So then you don't have like someone like Silver or Cypher to get information on like flanks or stuff like that. So you definitely need a lot of attack rounds, lots of kills in those rounds to make sure you're like always up in like a 4v2 situation. But it'll be interesting. I think it's gonna like, we're gonna see less duelists and maybe have like one duelist per team, but I might be a very outsider thought on that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the like the super exciting things about Valorant that keeps it will keep it fresh in a way that you don't really have in CS because of the agents, because of the possibility of a draft, because of having like 30 agents at some point. You could have a team that consists of like three or four duelists, and it could just be that that team plays very gambly. And it kind of reminds me of fighting games where there are some characters that are all about these like very gambly mix ups, and that's just like how those people like to play the game. And I feel like we could see stuff like that too. So yeah, there's lots of really interesting stuff there without getting too sort of in the weeds on it. Um, we also had a question about the Odin from Kelvin, and I do think the Odin is actually incredibly good. It's actually amazing. I've played with it quite a lot as Sova, and I think obviously you do want that vision assist that Sova gets, but it is so nuts. And given how much of a pick Sova is and how wall bangable basically everything in the game is, except on split, which is I think one of the reasons why Sova is slightly less valuable, it is insanely good. I wouldn't be surprised if they changed it slightly, but I think it's still okay, but mostly because I don't think people are abusing it still enough yet.
I think it's really good. I just don't feel like people are punished enough for having it out, I guess, because I think one of my major issues with it is just like how fast you can switch from like your knife to that and be firing.
Yeah.
I think that's my issue with it right now, because like if you think about the LMGs in CS, you're really punished if you're like quick switching in between them. So I think that might be something they adjust in the future, but I think it's really interesting in terms of just like how much damage it does, no like much recoil, highly wall bangable. So that's what I like about this game as well, just how viable every gun is.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's lots it's really fun. I have to say, we only have now one time for one more question. So I want to pick a question that I don't think. So this is another one from Kelvin. I like this question a lot. More seriously, how do you see EU versus NA going down in terms of style of play from the top teams? And have you watched much Asia? I haven't watched much Asia yet myself. Maybe we should actually do an Asia VOD review at some point. That'd be kind of interesting. As I don't have any familiarity with their teams and players really all that much yet. But in terms of the rest of that question, do you wanna get in there, Mike?
I think right now, like, the reason why a lot of people say NA is on top is because people are like really good at like reading the mid round with these defaults and stuff like that. And there's just not as many like org like signed teams in EU, I would say, compared to NA. And if you just look at the quality of the teams, I think it's easy to say like NA might be ahead. But I think that might just be in general. We always talk about in NA how we have like such a high pool of talent. It's just EU always makes better teams because the region is focusing on like team play and stuff like that. And I think we might have seen a tide turn where people in NA after they didn't make it in CS, obviously, were like, okay, this is a new start for me. I can try to take this like really seriously. I'm gonna work on being a team player, being a complete player. So I think that might be one of the reasons why like NA is slightly ahead right now. But I think when more talent comes up and more of these teams are kind of grinding out in EU, like eventually Bonk's gonna get like a really good lineup. They just have too many like good elements. And when that team gets signed to an org, then you're starting to talk about like, okay, now EU is starting to catch up in terms of like overall skill spread across the region. But it's like I still think it's too early to tell without seeing the styles actually collide on who's actually better.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's very strange because I agree with you that EU is a little bit behind in terms of the major support, the support of the tier one scene in comparison to the North America, and it's quite interesting because that is somewhat of a shift, I would say, over the last like 2 3 years, in terms of esports. But it's definitely interesting to see because I do think that if we had a matchup between, let's say, Sentinels and G2, I do definitely favor Sentinels, but just because I've seen them tested in more ways, and I feel like there isn't really that amount of testing that's really gone to G2 just yet. But Sentinels have had to deal with a variety of very different teams and very skilled teams and really competitive systems and so on and so forth. So, like, do you have a thought on, like, again, this is just guesswork, obviously, but do you have a gut feeling as to who would win that matchup and or how you think that would go between Sentinels and G2, like the two best teams respectively of their given regions?
I think it's actually like I think that'd be a really close matchup because they do a lot of like Sentinels do have like a really like good default and stuff like that, but I just think like we said earlier, the way they do contacts, the way they read the game, the way they synergize together, not just as agents, but like as team players, like their positioning, their pathing, their spacing is all just really good. Just all the fundamentals are there. So I think it would be really close. But between the two, I guess it would just matter if G2 would be able to read into their default and try to isolate fights against that. But if they couldn't, I would say like Sentinels would definitely take it, but it'd be really close.
All right. Well, with that said, it's time to close the show. But stay tuned, guys, because we are going to get on a raid. So stay tuned to see who that will be. But to update you as to what we have coming this Saturday, I will be playing a diabotical tournament, and I'll probably go out very quickly because I'm unprepared. Just got to set the expectations low to begin with. But beyond that, later on, instead of having our normal 10 a.m. Pacific time programmed scheduling, we are going to be going live with a co-stream for the Pulse Invitational tournament around 5 p.m. Pacific time, so much later in the day. And you'll have Mike and myself co-streaming, talking about some of the games that are going on, and that's gonna be a lot of fun. It'll be super interesting to see what's going on in the Pulse tournament. So check that out. And otherwise, make sure if you've missed the VOD analysis to check our YouTube channel. Make sure also to get onto the Discord if you aren't already in there to find like-minded individuals to play the game with, so that you don't have to just solo queue and just slam your head against the wall with the hell that it can be matchmaking. And also we have a cool match discussion channel, so if ever there is any pro matches going on and you just want to sit back and just chill and chat to people, you can do it in there as well. So Discord has lots of value for you guys. But it is time. Oh, hang on, before I do that, Mike, do you have anything going on you want to tell people about before we throw to the raid?
Think tomorrow might be the first day I actually don't watch a lot of demos for like 2 weeks, so probably gonna take that off, and then or wait, actually, Pulse starts tomorrow, so I'm gonna watch Pulse while it's live, but and then Saturday we'll do the co-stream, and then oh yeah, Blast is on this weekend, so I'll also be watching that. So not as much of a break as I thought, so more demos to watch.
Nice. Well, your brain is growing all the time, and that's only going to bode well for all the fans of Immortal Minds. All right, guys, that is everything for today's show. Let's get ourselves on the raid. I don't know who we're raiding. I think it's a surprise. Okay, it's Penguin Law. Do us proud.